Patrice Jenkins, welcome to the Retire Sooner podcast. Where are you coming live from?
I'm calling in from Catskill, New York.
Catskill, New York, and the only thing I know really about the Catskills is that's Rip Van Winkle country, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I live about a half a mile from the Rip Van Winkle Bridge. I walk across it every morning over the Hudson River, and that's what we're famous for here.
Well, and the Rip Van Winkle story, and the reason I bring that up is that it's one of these nice analogs, or I guess it's a nice story to remind investors just how time can be a wonderful thing when it comes to sailing through storms, right? Rip Van Winkle slept through the Revolutionary War. He woke up and America was free and it was great. And he was able to kind of just have that time and be well rested as well. So again, I think it's a great, and the story of Rip Van Winkle is a wonderful for the passage of time, particularly for investors and those who are into retirement. So I wanted to have you on Retire Sooner podcast for a lot of different reasons, but so many retirees are faced with not understanding what to do next. And I get so many questions that I feel as though I can't just give a quick, easy answer. What do we do next? What do we do in retirement? I've worked all these years, and it's a hard thing for people to solve, even if they're financially in a good place, whether they do some sort of second act career, whether they do some sort of career change, or they don't really need to work and it's volunteering. But maybe we'll just start out with We'll start out with a couple of things here. I know you love success stories. So one, I would ask you, why do you love them so much? And maybe just give our audience a little bit around what understanding these success stories can help, or why can it help as we transition into kind of our next phase?
Well, I think probably everyone loves success stories, but what I really am curious about is how that success started. So when we see a success story, it's usually, months, years down the road, and we see where that person is now. But the story I want to ask, I want to roll that clock back and say, was there one thing you did that put this ball into motion? And I have learned in the few times I've done that actually it's not a huge thing. Sometimes it was a crisis that created it, which is why I have a chapter in my book, Create a Crisis. Sometimes it was just, I'm curious enough about this that I want to put something into motion and see what comes from it. There are no success stories without starting stories. And so I like to find out what those starting stories are, because when we know those, we can help someone else see where their start begins. I thought it was great when I was watching the Winter Olympics and the Visa had a commercial. Everyone celebrates the finish line, but what about the starting line? And I thought, that's right. That's what I'm about. I care about those starting stories. And retirement is a perfect time to do that.
It is. It's a perfect time to restart. You talk about trying to help folks. And again, you've got a couple of books. What Will I Do All Day? Which I love that title, by the way. And then I know more recently you wrote It's Still Good. Right. Dreams Don't Have Expiration Dates, which is to some extent, I guess, a homage to talking about getting started if you haven't already embarked on a dream. But what will I do all day that will be meaningful? You ask, what are you going to do all day that's going to be meaningful and to give you purpose in your life? It's easy to keep busy, and it's hard to really have full direction. So to walk somebody through who's headed towards retirement that is trying to contemplate that, Patrice.
Right. Well, first of all, the title for that book, thank you for saying you really like it. It came from interviews from people that were just really stuck on the decision. And they would so often come down to, what will I do all day? And that decided that not knowing to have an answer to that beyond just keeping busy, and I can't stand the word keeping busy or killing time, or that drives me nuts. But without an answer to that, they were too afraid to let go of what they knew for sure, which is continuing to go into work every day. So what will I do all day came from that is what it seemed to be the question that people needed help to be able to step over that line. it was interesting. I was even to roll this back more, and I don't know how far back you want me to go, but my degree's in.
I want you to go back to the starting. I want you to go back to the starting line.
Thanks. That's where it all begins. I have a doctorate in organizational psychology. And organizational psychology is the study of basically human behavior in the workplace. And something I'm really interested in is job satisfaction, motivation. Why do some people thrive at work while others just try to get through the day? And so I used to read those kind of journals as bedtime stories to myself. So when I decided to pursue a doctorate, it was only natural that's what I would study. And specifically, I was studying the psychological state of thriving at work. So thriving has two components to it. You are experiencing energy and vitality, as well as learning and growth. Both are present. You might come home, Wes, at the end of the day and say, man, I was just in the zone today. When that happens, you probably were growing and learning and energized by that and feeling that wonderful experience that continues to get better with time as we reflect on it, the gratification, satisfaction from it. When I was doing my interviews for my doctorate, I was also writing the book, What Will I Do All Day? I don't know why I was doing all of that at the same time, but
That's like a lot.
and 3 teenage kids, but you just do stuff because you get started. And what I was noticing is I was interviewing people who were considered high thriving employees, identified by their HR director within this one company. And I was noticing the things they were saying about what contributed to their thriving at work were very similar to what people were saying who were experiencing a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction from retirement. So, and those kind of things were a sense of purpose, specific, measurable goals still, being challenged. Nobody in either boat, either thriving at work or thriving in retirement, nobody was talking about how long their vacations were or every day feeling like Saturday and Sunday. So that's when I got this concept of kind of marrying the two. How can we take the best of work and bring it into designing the best of retirement?
So this is fascinating to me. So at work, thriving at work is similar to thriving in retirement. I don't know if I've had anybody look at it quite that way, and I love that thought. So it's the same set of circumstances. So the energy and vitality plus learning and growth, that totally works at work, but you need the same thing in retirement. Now I'm going to ask you about, I was going to ask you, but you've already told me a little bit about organizational psychology. I go back to the Gartner Group study, and I don't know if you've read this or seen this in some capacity or not, because I've seen this study updated several times where the Gartner Group study that essentially says only about 1 in 5 workers are fully engaged or love their work. 3 out of 5 kind of take it or leave it. It's not terrible, but they don't love it. And then 1 out of 5 hate work so much they're actively trying to bring their employer down. They want their company to fail.
Yes, right.
So you're talking about job satisfaction, Patrice, is really only that one layer, the 1 in 5 typically in America. Is that similar to what you found over the years, or is it big? Is it more than that?
Well, I think it's job satisfaction kind of narrows that down a little too much, at least in terms of within the discipline, how it's defined. But in terms of engagement, intrinsic motivation, what we call organizational citizenship behaviors, that means doing extra things for the company that you don't have to do, but you just do them because you feel this connection, a sense of belonging to the company. All those together, I think, make up that number one, that person who's really is thriving in the workplace when those kind of situations are present. And it's pretty easy to spot when something isn't working. Well, for an organizational psychologist with some measurements and so on, pretty easy to spot what are some of the reasons that are holding people back from experiencing that. And naturally, that's what we try to address.
Well, okay, so that is maybe being, how do you get unstuck at work? Is it mean you're in the wrong job, wrong employer, or is it have to do with you and your mental state at your job to get unstuck?
Well, I'll just give one little example. And that is in terms of where does the intrinsic motivation come from at work? So you know what you have to do. But some people are just there doing it because that's what drives them. But there needs to be sort of three things present to experience that intrinsic motivation. I use the acronym CAR, CAR, and this is how we drive that car. One is to have a sense of competence in what you're expected to do. Another is autonomy. So you have some choice, some freedom to put your own, stamp on this. And the other is relatedness. The R is relatedness, and it's that sense that I'm part of a group here. There's a place for me, a sense of belonging. And when we see those things missing, someone who normally would be quite driven by their work, it's difficult to do because those are missing. Another is a psychological contract we have. So it's not anything in writing, but it's this understanding if I give the company this much, they're going to, in return, give me so much. Would I ask for some special time off? I've given all this to them. I can expect that to come back. But if that contract gets broken and again, it's just a psychological, it's just in your head, but that gets broken, that's going to change your level of motivation on what kind of giving you're going to do, an allegiance, an engagement at work.
So the psychological contract, that concept is that I have to feel as though I'm putting in all this effort, and then what is so I'm giving all this effort, but I also need to feel like I am adequately rewarded for my commitment.
Exactly.
And that's the psychological contract. And if it doesn't feel right, then we're not in a place that we love.
Right.
At work.
Right. Or we'll pull back behaviors that would benefit the company.
And then we also need competence and so competence. We have to have the ability to be good at the job, and then we do want autonomy. We want to be kind of left alone if we're good at our job. Yeah, and then I guess we want this group. We want to feel like we're part of a group, and that drives motivation at work. Patrice,
I was talking with someone. So one thing that's been, we'll have to bring this back around to retirement in a minute here, but I was talking with someone who was really struggling in a new position in a major tech company. Now, what's been hard for people onboarding during COVID is they're onboarding virtually. And so this was a case when he was describing his situation, I instantly saw where these three things were missing. In a new position, you don't necessarily feel competent. You have so much to learn. And when he was in the workplace, he could have just walked down the hall and casually sat down with a cup of coffee and said, hey, I'm struggling in this area. But when it's all virtual, it just requires that much more effort and formality around it. As far as relatedness, he felt he was on an island, not a part of something. And then the autonomy, we kind of had all this autonomy, but he didn't know what to do with it because he didn't know what he was doing. So when we could diagnose what that was, then you start to know what it is you're looking to fix. And that's actually true with retirement too. When we've been in it for a length of time, that's when we start to discover what's missing and what we need to go searching for to bring that in, because most of us don't just retire successfully on the first day. We figure it out as we go, just as people do in jobs.
Well, that was the question that's another question I wanted to frame it is, how do retirees feel about not working or not going to work every day, right? We do think of, well, should be a more relaxing time, a more golden period of time. But then there is this struggle about I'm not working. And do you find, let's talk about that struggle, and then what do we do about it?
That's really the person that I wrote my book, What Will I Do All Day? I wrote that book because I cared about people who are of the appropriate age to retire, have financially prepared for retirement, and are just too afraid to step over the line because they don't know if they'll be successful. They know what they're doing now and all the benefits of that, but this is the unknown. And so they continue to go into work every day. I wanted them to see this next stage of life as an opportunity, that life isn't all about one chapter. But first I had to find out an answer to what's holding them back. And so there's several things. And when you mention not going into work, there's some, and obviously this isn't true for everyone. Some people retire, they happily, they often aren't very attached to their work identity, which helps because they haven't lost that big piece if they don't have a strong attachment to that. But for those that my book addresses, that I address through coaching and so on, it's more about this anxiety that builds up when they're not working, that the idea they're not working. Because try answering this question, what do you do without talking about your work? That's really hard to do. People tell me, I feel like I have to keep talking until I see some kind of glimpse in the receiver's eyes that, they valid, like, oh yeah, you're still engaged, you're still important.
It's funny. I feel like in America, you're right. It is. We are just so defined by our work. And I spent a little bit of time in the UK this past year, and I did really notice the difference in some of the conversations where it wasn't focused about what I did. I remember not even getting the question of like, what do you do? And even when it comes up, it's kind of like, oh, that's great. Next, let's talk about your life and something else. And is that, I guess, is that America or is that just us?
It is America. I've been told the same thing about Europe, that it actually, asking someone, what do you do, is like us asking someone, how much money do you make? That it really is inappropriate to ask because, the bottom line is we are kind of sizing people up. Oh, you do that. Well, now I know you're in this, socioeconomic, and we do measure each other up when it comes to that. So I think it is quite an American thing. In terms of when we're not working, one thing that we feel a little out of sync, especially, it's not that we want to get up and go to work at, 6:37 in the morning. We don't necessarily want to set the alarm. Not setting an alarm is my favorite part. One of my favorite parts about retirement. Still get up early. It's just so nice to go to bed without the alarm set. But when you start to see, if you live in a cul-de-sac or something, people getting up and going out to their cars and going out, there's this rhythm to that day that we've established for 30, 35, 40 years. And we feel a little out of sync with that. I know someone, he gets his paper and he goes to Starbucks at 7:15 every morning because that is a routine that makes him feel like, what it fits into is continuity theory. So continuity theory is where we psychologically benefit by keeping a pattern, a structure as similar as possible as we go through transitions. So that is one technique to use to help bridge that transition that I see that this person.
That's interesting to think about continuity. And I think about some of the conversations I've had as after the post-summer. And post-summer is people going here and there, and they may be renting a place for a couple of weeks, and the kids are doing this. And as much as we don't love going back to school, right? Kids are not loving going back to school, and parents will complain, oh, now we're hectic, and the summer's over, and we're back to the hustle and bustle. But then I also get this, it's kind of nice to be back into the rhythm. And you're explaining that as the sense of continuity that is something that maybe we don't think about in retirement as much because we typically, we can lose that very easily.
And when we lose that, we can lose ourselves. What we're always kind of watching for is what doesn't feel right here, because retirement is a major life transition. And there's been, different models of the stages that people go through with that transition. But almost every model has this point kind of in the middle. I call it the messy middle, where we are over the honeymoon phase. And William Bridges in his book, The Way of Transitions, puts it, he's not talking about retirement, but he could be. It's like things aren't the old way, but they're not a new way yet either. And it's this messy middle that is when we need to start looking for something like continuity theory. Not that you're going to call it that, but what can I do to create a rhythm to my day that feels right to me, that makes this adjustment easier.
So can you give our audience, our listeners, maybe some examples of what people should start doing now? So what do we start planning today in advance of a retirement date, and when? When do you start planning for the transition?
It's really smart to start planning 3 to 5 years in advance. I do a lot of speaking for the New York State Teachers Retirement System, so those educators can start coming to those workshops at any time. And sometimes they're 10 years in advance and they think it's way too early, but definitely 3 to 5 years. It's important to start preparing for this. One of the main things to start thinking about is, what are the psychological benefits of work that you really value? Because we know in terms of finances, we can run put that through an equation and kind of figure out where we're going to be to some degree.
A little more empirical, right?
And
more empirical.
But we can't do that so much with, will I be happy in retirement? So we need to think about is, what are the psychological benefits I'm getting from work that have nothing to do with the money? Those that are what we need to find a way to replace once we're not working, because our need for those don't diminish. We continue to need those. And for example, it might be, a sense of accomplishment, learning and growth, socialization, a place to go, recognition and rewards, feeling a part of something. All of those people, and in workshops, I'll have people write their top 5. And then we work from those top 5 and through an exercise of figuring out, okay, just because I'm not working doesn't mean I don't need these anymore. They're just not built into my life anymore. So I'm going to have to be intentional about bringing these back in. Where can I do that?
Which seems like a pretty tall order, right? I mean, if you think about all those psychological benefits while you're working, about being able to accomplish, being able to have growth, automatic socialization, right? Whether whether our coworkers are our best friends or not, we have this automatic socialization, and then it is a place to go, which kind of goes back to your continuity theory. And then recognition is one, and not everybody needs that, but for those who it's something that it's certainly psychologically can be positive. So that seems like a lot to replace if you put it in that context. That's a lot. And by the way, are those kind of your top 5 that
those
people say?
The ones I just reeled off.
Yeah.
Some people say really funny things like, I'm going to miss what second graders say, because they're so funny. Like I said, I speak with educators a lot. But those are probably the most common ones. And yes, I'm glad you recognize that as a tall order, because it is. And I kind of have the motto, if it's going to be, it's up to me. In other words, we have to be very intentional about how to bring these back. And if we're not experiencing the fullness that retirement has, to offer us. Now, one area in particular that's really good to focus on ahead of time is expanding your roles. So there's role theory, and we identify with roles, whether that's the work role, which is huge, a parenting role, a role in the community, all of that. It's good to know in advance what degree is your attachment to the work role, your work identity, because even if you're still working to some degree, that's your work role is going to diminish. And we need then to place value on some of these other roles and build them up and add new roles to that too, which is what I think is really an opportunity in retirement. Like right now I'm learning to play the drums. Because when I was a kid, I wanted to learn how to play the drums. So for $15 on Udemy, I signed up for a course and I bought some $5 drumsticks, or my husband bought them. He got tired of me using pencils. And I'm experimenting with being a drummer. I even asked him, my husband says, I wonder what a drummer my age wears. And he said, I think you need to learn how to play first. But it's all about embracing that whole role.
You know what I immediately think of is the Geico commercial and the Muppet in the upstairs, and the Muppet is just going crazy on the drums. That's Patrice Jenkins, PhD in organizational psychology. She's upstairs just going to town on the drums. because she's never. Now, was this something early on that's a dream that you had never? Let's talk a little bit about these one day dreams, or the thought dreams don't have expiration dates. I want to hear about. Is that something that you've always wanted to do, or is that a new one?
I did drums when I was in 4th grade and chose an instrument. But my mom, there were 7 kids in my family, and we all played instruments. So none of us were allowed to play drums. I played clarinet.
Did you love clarinet or?
And piano also.
Not really. I just wrote a story for the Atlanta Journal about clarinets. We have a family that one of our advisors has worked with that they met in a clarinet band when they were young, had a bunch of kids and could never really play the clarinet, and then in retirement took it back up and then ended up forming an entire clarinet band.
Awesome.
And they ultimately ended up playing at Carnegie Hall.
So let me use that example and build that out around an idea here. So we talk about these psychological benefits of work and how to get them back. So what you just described, one is revisiting something that you did earlier in life, in this case, playing an instrument. Now, you could just take that instrument and just play for yourself, 20 minutes a day. And you could play the same songs, but hopefully you would challenge yourself to get a little better. You would start to increase the difficulty of those pieces. Then you think about, well, why don't I bring a group together to play? So now there's some socialization, there's some structure and routine, and there's some accountability. Now, what if we had a wild, crazy goal for our group here to play at Carnegie Hall? What would that take? So you see how you keep pulling more of those benefits in when you start with something and you I call it compounding interest. You should like that with financial background. But how do you just keep making it bigger by pulling in more things? Maybe I'm learning the drums also because my husband in retirement learned to play the bagpipes. So it might be
that's
revenge,
cool too.
a noise thing.
Yeah, bagpipes are rough at the beginning. Violins rough, but drums are probably the roughest, right? When you're a new drummer. So I would maybe call this boomerang core pursuits. So they start early and they come back. But I love the idea compounding interests. I love that, or compounding interests. You just keep expanding on this path that you've started to go down.
Right. And ideally, you can build that up to the point, if we look at positive psychology and the 3 different areas of happiness, the first one just being the pleasant life. So, an ice cream cone is delicious. A movie was really enjoyable. But those things kind of diminish with time. You need another ice cream. You need the second one, the meaningful life. That's about having that state of flow, being totally engaged in something that's and coming from that with a greater sense of satisfaction. So that's where thriving at work would fall into. And then there's the third level, and the engaged life. And actually, I might have those 2 mixed up as I speak. But that's about being involved in something greater than yourself. And if we can take some of these interests, you would call them core pursuits, and continue to build them up to the point that we actually start to have an opportunity to do that in a situation that's greater than ourselves. It just so much, it could just continues to be rewarding and bring that satisfaction. Again, compounding interest, but being intentional about choosing something that's going to build up to that level. Speaking of the bagpipes, he learned those. He asked someone else to learn the same time. He got a teacher. He has a kilt. He's in a band. And this past Saturday, he played Amazing Grace at a funeral of, a friend's father. So see how that kind of grows.
So it continues to evolve. It's continued to evolve. What is it that when we get into adulthood, we get into really just adulthood in general and then into retirement, don't we kind of just stop dreaming? Don't we kind of stop that to some extent? Don't we stop reaching for new stuff? And why is that so much?
I think people stop before retirement. I think a lot of dreams get left behind once we get so busy with work and family and financial obligations, and those some of those ideas we had just start to seem like, oh, they don't really matter anymore. So sometimes even before retirement, we have to go back and revisit. And in fact, retirement is the time to go back and revisit some of those ideas, because now we do have time. It's not cool to say, I'm not busy, but I'm not busy. And we need to take away that status that comes with being, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. No, we're not. Instead, how are you spending and how are you investing your time? Be really wise about how you do that, and leave room in there for things, unexpected things to bubble up and be able to fit in. Don't cram your calendar, because we're not trying to make retirement look like work. It's something else.
No, I love that. And I guess my thought though is that, let's say let's say you're already retired and you're in it. What is and how do you counsel people to do this, or when you write about it, or do you actually counsel, do you do one-on-one as well with people?
I do some. I make them jump through quite a few hoops, because I don't want them to be coming to me for easy answers, because there aren't easy answers. So I make them jump through quite a few hoops. One is to write a chapter for my book as if it were about them, because they will usually have read my book, and I'll say, they say, I feel like it's written for you. I'm like, then write your chapter. And they do. But anyway, so I love that.
So you'll say, write your chapter. And then, so your favorite piece of advice to give somebody who's already retired but not enjoying it then is what? Once they get to you, after they write the chapter.
Well, they'd have to go back and figure out what, kind of didn't work with the plan that they had. And, you don't know that until you're out for a while and you do experiment. But the first thing I like to emphasize is that it's normal to not be experiencing retirement in the Hallmark version. So if I will always pick up retirement cards and read the messages. And there's so often, this idea you're going to just enjoy every day. It's just a big vacation, no responsibility, nothing. That I think they have that wrong. I encourage people actually go buy your own retirement card. Look for the message that speaks to you, and that will help you understand how you want to experience retirement. I did that for myself, and mine is dreams don't follow the clock, they follow the heart. And it's like that's my retirement right there. So the idea that it's normal to experience some dissatisfaction with retirement helps people to realize, oh, I'm not alone, because we often don't talk about it. People will say, oh, it's great. But one person said to me, some days, she says, kind of like work. Some days I love it, some days I hate it. So normalize.
But you can't quit. I guess you could quit retirement. You could go back to work.
Right. And I call that not quitting retirement. I kind of think of that as figuring out your retirement. Now, if you're going back in, if you're using work as just an escape, if you're hiding out there, then that doesn't qualify. But if you are making my definition of retirement is, what do you want to make yourself available to? So sometimes we have to let go of what we know for sure and be willing to open ourselves up to, what would I like to be available to? So the other thing, though, with someone who's dissatisfied is to realize not everything is broken. You might not be feeling great about this, but this is where your 10 steps, I think, come in, because you can look at those and see, okay, I'm doing all right in this area, and this area, and this area, but this is where I'm lacking. Can I break that down to a couple things? It's kind of like a treasure hunt. If we can break it down to those, now we know what we can focus on and take steps to bring that, whatever that is that we need, into our life. It's not all broken.
Yeah, I think to some extent, Patrice, you're maybe referring to, we talk a lot about the 10 habits of happy retirees, and right, and there's one chapter is the money chapter, and there are a couple things to get to there. And if you've done that, it's kind of like, okay, well, I've got my financial checkpoints done, and then it's about core pursuits, and am I good at that? And then what about socialization? Do I have that piece of the equation of my 10 habits in check. And it's always this balancing game. We're never great at all 10 of these, right? Or so we can always work on one of these chapters to get better, whether it's the socialization piece, whether it's the family piece, whether it is the financial piece, whether it's the core pursuits piece. Believing in giving is another it's another habit of happy retiree. So you're right. There's all of these it's always a work in progress, and not everything is firing on all cylinders at any given time. You run a business called Day One Dreams.
Right.
Can tell our audience about Day One Dreams.
So actually, I'm glad that you're asking about this, because it's a really good way to illustrate a lot of what we've been talking about. So Day One Dreams came to me after writing It's Still Good, Dreams Don't Have Expiration Dates. And this, after spending a year really focusing on the power of just starting. So with my book, I decided finally, I'm still, why am I still curious about what I have to say on this topic? And so one day I just opened up a Word doc and started writing. I declared that my today day. I didn't have any expectations about what that would become. It's just that I would know what it would be, what it will be by getting started. So after doing that, I realized just that power of deciding today's the day. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Visa commercial with everyone celebrates the finish line, but what about the starting line? I thought, that's it. That's what I care about. I want to help people identify their starting line and decide on a day to get going. So I do what I call dream shopping, where I'll think of something, an idea, and
Sounds cool. That sounds cool.
And I'll try it on. I'll imagine myself being that person or whatever it might be. And so Day One Dreams, when I was experimenting with the idea, I was on a plane and I pulled my computer out and I wrote up this whole conversation with the person next to me that I was just making up in my head. But it was as if that person had asked, what do you do? And I told them, this is what I do. And I had a lot of fun with that conversation. And then when I got home, I looked to see if the domain name was available. And sure enough, for the cost of a bottle of wine, I could get that domain name. And, that's true with my, I think my next book is going to be, what can you do with the cost of a bottle of wine? Because my drumming course is also, I'm talking a $15 bottle of wine. And so I thought, for $15, I can just live with that idea and make sure someone else doesn't take it before me. And so then I had it forwarded to my Patrice Jenkins website. And then I revised the website. And most recently, I've formed, with two women that I write about in my book, we formed a Day One Success team. So this is an idea that's just evolving. And now I'm talking with you about it. So other people are going to know see how it kind of becomes real when you just put something in motion?
Yeah, it's the compound. It's the thought of compounding interest, right? Which I love that. I love that term. Speaking of domain names, I was looking at domain names the other day that I've bought. I have 50, 60 domain names that I bought over the years. Now some of them ended up
all wine.
It's about 18. Yeah, I guess that's a couple cases worth of wine, but I do actually. That's really kind of a fun. Here's one that I bought that'll never work. That I went through a small phase when I started eating healthy, and I don't always eat healthy, but I discovered Japanese sweet potatoes. These Japanese sweet potatoes that are purple, and I'd never even heard of them or even seen them. And I ended up going to Whole Foods and this book that I read about eating healthy was like, oh, try Japanese sweet potatoes. And so I really became a quick fan of these Japanese sweet potatoes, slicing them up, salt, pepper, oil, vinegar, and it was such a great combination. And essentially what I figured that why is there no chip? Why don't people make chips out of these Japanese sweet potatoes? So I, for some reason, came up with the name Kobayashi chips because it was a Japanese sounding name. And I ended up, I think that same night coming up with that idea, I went and bought, could you believe it? It was actually available, kobayashichips.com. So if anybody has some inclination to buy a Japanese sweet potato chip company website URL. I own it. Anyway.
Yeah, it's going to cost them a lot. But you know what? You just did. How fun was that? And reflecting on, as you tell the story, you can tell you get enjoyment out of just telling the story. Those are like just little things that we need to do more of in retirement. Live a little more whimsical. Retirement's a great time to do that.
So I know a lot of the advice you give is kind of psychological advice. What about, do you have any thoughts around the financial side of being able to be happy in retirement, fulfilled in retirement? What is the kind of the financial side of what you talk to folks about?
Bottom line is I don't talk much about financial to people, other than I make a couple things clear. One is, before we can even really address the psychological side, we need to have our health and our wealth. Those are the two most important factors going into retirement. And so when I say our wealth, I'm not talking about, being super rich. I'm talking about being able to sleep at night with knowing what your finances look like. So with that, I really emphasize that people know the numbers, especially when we're not feeling very confident about our preparation. We tend to just kind of ignore it then. Like, I know when I'm gaining weight, I stop getting on the scale because I don't want to see the number. If I get on, then I can face it. The truth shall set you free, and you can do something about it. So I encourage people, know the numbers.
How often or how much anxiety do you see around the financial side of retirement? Do you see it half the folks you talk to? Is it most people? Is it not as many? What is the anxiety level that you see?
Well, I would say the people I speak with, I don't see it a lot, because that's not really why they're talking to me necessarily about it. But I am sure that it's out there. It's just, that's not what they come to me for. Or if they have watched my online course at Udemy, basically it's just the idea of health and wealth. Get those in place. Get people like you to be working with. And it's not that I had a couple that when they did run the numbers, they realized they were going to have to work another 5 years. And so instead of getting really discouraged about that, they decided to treat their weekends as if they were retired. So that means during the week, they do their grocery shop and the laundry, cut the lawn. They don't do chores on the weekends. The weekends are about seeing what cultural events are going on, by whatever kind of things they imagine they would do if they were retired. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. But,
that's kind of cool. That's a very cool idea. I haven't heard that before. So if you mentioned your online courses, one of the questions so what is your favorite book that you've written, and then your favorite online course, or what are people going to get out of your course typically?
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with the course, because my favorite book is the one I just wrote, because I finally found out what I had to say about that topic.
It's still good. Dreams don't have expiration dates.
But the book that has surprised me the most is my retirement book. The response to my retirement book, it's been out for over a decade, and more people are finding it, and everything in it is still relevant as much today as any day. And I get emails frequently of people that thank me for writing it, say, I feel like this was like you were speaking directly to me. I had to write this book for some reason. I started writing it when I was like 47 years old. What did I have to say about this topic? But I don't know. I just wrote because I cared about it. It turns out, I guess I did have something to say about it. So that it surprises me the most, the people's response to it.
And that's what will I do all day. So you started writing that when you were 47. So way before you were retired.
At 47, I started, I was working in a college career office, and my secretary was of all those things I described, right age, financially, blah, blah, blah. And she was too afraid. So I started writing. I cared about that. I started writing exercises for her to help her see really what it was that was holding her back. So that was the beginning of it all back at that time.
And then what about, online course? Tell me about your favorite online course that you do.
So I, in my talks, specifically with the teachers retirement system, those talks are just 1 hour. And I always felt like there was so much I still wanted to share with that group. The other group I cared about is people in corporate America. I'm told that in many cases, it's not safe to talk about retirement. I've had
That's a great point.
People say, I would love to have you come, but nobody would come or would go to the talk. Or I would say, tell my coworker to go and take good notes because they don't want to reveal their cards. So I wanted to create content and a safe place for people to prepare for this decision and walk through those transitional stages. So that is what I created on udemy.com. The title of it is A Guide to Take the Weirdness Out of Retirement. Because awesome. I had someone that I know walk in when I was at Starbucks and he had just retired and he says, isn't this weird? We're here on a Friday morning at 10 a.m. We should be at work. And that course, I have to say that course is really good. I watch it and the content is really good. I used my son's bedroom for a production studio, so it's a little amateur, but that's what we do in retirement. We convert our kids' bedrooms into other things.
Well, so Patrice, as we wrap here, so you've got a guide to take the weirdness out of retirement. That's on Udemy, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got your most recent book is It's Still Good. The book with the most longevity is What Will I Do All Day, and that's a book about wisdom in retirement to get on with living. And where do we find you as an audience that wants to reach out to you in the Catskill?
Right.
In Catskill, in the Catskills.
I'm either here or in Saratoga Springs. That's my other place. And right now it's track season, so I'm headed up there. So.
Oh, it is. It's horse racing season. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So at my website, patricejenkins.com is the best. There's links there to connect or to email.